Now we are switching over to Nicola.
Thanks a lot, Holger. Thanks a lot, colleagues, for this opportunity to present the findings of this research. We will present a paper, Switching It Up, the Effect of Energy Price Reforms in Oman. This is a paper co-authored by Aman, Cantore, Khalid, Todorov, and Cheng. Aman from the University of Nottingham and UNIDO. I'm from UNIDO, Department of Policy Statistics, Khalid, World Bank, Todorov, UNIDO, and Cheng, University, the Minister of Industry of Oman. I will present this paper with Jürgen Hammann, who is with me today. We'll present the findings of the paper. For practical reason, it will be Jürgen, of course, sharing the presentations, and then we'll start, and then he will join and we'll conclude. So, the starting points of this discussion is the fossil fuel subsidies. So please, Jürgen, you can.
So exactly. Hello, everybody. I was just wondering if you can see my shared screen at all.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Jürgen.
Thanks a lot. I will be probably introducing myself when I start talking about the paper that we are presenting today in the second part. But I just quickly wanted to also extend my gratitude for being in a position to present our ongoing work here to the panel and all the participants. So thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Jürgen. So the starting point of our discussion is the fossil fuel subsidies. Fossil fuel subsidies is a topic which is now widely debated in the international debate. There are many governments who use subsidies in order to reduce the price of fossil fuel. According to the estimates of the International Energy Agency, in 2020, fossil fuel subsidies are estimated as $182 billion. So it is a huge amount of money. And even though it seems that in the last years, the path of fossil fuel subsidies have been decreasing over time. Please. What's rational of the policy of using the fossil fuel subsidies? The rationale is that from a consumption side is the fossil fuel subsidies are seen as a way in order to reduce the price of fuel for households. On the production side, the fossil fuel subsidies are seen as a relief for enterprises, for firms, in order to reduce the production costs. In this slide, you see, for example, one sentence extracted from the European Commission fact sheet, energy taxation for energy products. For households, taxes represent on average 40% of the electricity price and 25% of the gas price. In 2017, industry, for competitiveness reason, is usually taxed less than households. The average industrial consumer pays 13% of the gas price in taxes and between 34 and 38% in taxes on electricity. So the key point of this slide is that in many cases, from the production side, fossil fuel subsidies are perceived as a way in order to increase the competitiveness of firms. So what is the rationale? The rationale is that if the price of fuel is lower, production costs of firms become lower. It is, of course, incentivize firms in order to improve profits and investment in the long term, also profits in the future. Thanks. So this static view interpreting the, let's say, reduced price of fuel is, of course, challenged by some relevant literature. For example, a well-known hypothesis in the economics literature is the Porter hypothesis. The Porter hypothesis claims that environmental policies may trigger the competitiveness of firms, even those policies which are market-based. So, for example, think about carbon taxes or energy taxes may trigger the competitiveness of firms through higher innovation, higher attention of firms towards business upgrading. The main concerns of economists towards the Porter hypothesis is that, okay, if the taxes are so beneficial for firms, why doesn't happen that always that energy price trigger these benefits? Well, there is a literature why in many cases firms do not implement, for example, energy efficiency, innovation, green innovation. There is a literature explaining that firms sometimes, of course, behave not in thinking in terms of profit maximization over a long time horizon. So there is an imperfect bounded rationality. They, for example, sometimes think in terms of the short-term perspective and not the long-term. They work in the presence of asymmetric information, so the fact that they may take choices by not taking into account the full information set. In other words, in many cases, firms behave with under suboptimality conditions because of market failure. Please. This literature of how firms behave as a response of higher energy prices has been is quite unexplored in the current literature. There is an interesting paper for Rentschler who summarize a bit 4 main behaviors of firms as a response of higher energy prices. For example, the firms may react to higher energy prices by absorbing the higher costs. So this means less profits, or passing on this higher cost of energy. This is so the fact that the firms may pass on the higher cost to the consumer. There is also an increasing literature now who also tries to understand how firms react in terms of substitution across production factors or in terms of higher energy efficiency. Well, in terms of substitution across production factors, we have to be aware of one thing. In many cases, literature has pointed out these effects, the firm responses to higher energy prices lead to negative effects to profits. This new literature, the emerging literature, is also emphasizing some positive effects that higher energy price may trigger. And this is visible, especially if we consider a different source of energy. For example, fossil fuel versus electricity. A paper, for example, recent paper from Kali et al., a collaboration between UNID and World Bank research, has emphasized, for example, that higher price, by taking into account evidence for Mexico, Indonesia, we have seen that higher prices for fossil fuel may trigger firms to replace fuel-powered old capital equipment with more modern and productive electricity equipment. So an interesting point of this paper was that higher energy fuel prices, and so removal of fossil fuel subsidies could trigger a positive effect on the profitability, on the productivity of firms. And these fuel prices also may trigger energy efficiency, and energy efficiency, fuel efficiency. This efficiency, of course, is something which is may also trigger total factor productivity of firms, so the overall production process of the firm. This paper focuses, again, this does not happen with electricity. When electricity price increases, there are less margin of substitution of electricity-based capital equipment with other modern sources of capital equipment. But for fuel, this business upgraded process happens. This paper that we are presenting now focuses on another transmission channel. Higher fuel prices may trigger business upgrading in terms of higher ICT devices. So modernization in terms of a computerized system of production processes of firms. Please. So this paper, the origin of this paper and the motivation lies on the fact that there is a lack of microeconomic evidence in the literature there is a need of mapping economic transmission channel for higher fuel prices to responses of firms, because it seems that there has been a more emphasis on the negative part of the stories, on the fact that high energy prices generate a loss of profits and competitiveness, and there is not enough understanding on the positive side. And this also triggers a debate on to what extent energy transition and green energy transition can be compatible with industrialization. So win-win situation, please. This paper focuses especially on the case of Oman. As I was saying, is a paper that emphasizes to what extent increase in fossil fuel energy factor prices improve productivity, efficiency, lead to business upgrading. And it's also a reflection on the extent policies that are being conducted in Oman, to some extent. Policies that are being conducted in Oman in order to reduce fossil fuel subsidies have impacted the performance and the productivity of firms. This is particularly relevant, please, especially for the case of Oman, as we have seen that Oman is particularly affected by climate change. You see in this slide, for example, some simulations concerning the possible increase of temperature from climate change. And you can see the consequences of climate change in a country like Oman, where, of course, there is water scarcity, diversification. There is a commitment in the Oman Second National Communication saying that the energy demand stream will focus on cutting fossil fuel subsidies, developing awareness programs, centralizing energy planning. This is a sentence which is contained in a document which addresses climate change. Our paper is an attempt also to see the other side of the story. To what extent an environment-friendly, more environment-friendly policy, what can be a reduction of fossil fuel subsidies, may have an impact on the economic dimension, on the performance indicators. This is part of our strand of research that you need a World Bank are conducting. Please, Jürgen. Jürgen.
Hello. So I've just moved over to my presentation. Just double checking if you can still hear me. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah,
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot. So I've got about 5 minutes left, which is why I'm probably going to rush through a couple of things. I'm very happy to expand on the certain points that seem to be missing of this presentation then in the Q&A session. So just a bit of institutional context here. As Nico already said, that the Sultanate of Oman is heavily reliant on oil and gases. For example, in 2009, those two sectors alone, that's gas and oil, accounted for about 80% of government revenue. And it's also been very strong, favorably used in the production of power in the past. There has been a slight paradigm shift in the mid-2010s as a result of the reduction in oil revenue and an increase in domestic demand, which led to an abolishment of fossil fuel subsidies, as you can see in Table 1. You do not see the same tendency in as far as electric subsidies goes in the very right column of Table number 1. Accompanied by this paradigm shift was a reform package that advocated the improvement of energy efficiency and endorsed ICT technology by means of investment strategies and support in that. Again, there's much more to say about this, but I'm just going to very quickly talk about the data that we have analyzed, and that is that of the Omani Annual Industrial Statistical Survey. It's a bit of a mouthful, but basically what it is, it's a panel data set for a manufacturing establishment licensed under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry of the Sultanate of Oman, and it gives us 6 years worth of data for manufacturing industries, which we can classify on the IC Revision 3 digit level. So we do know quite a bit about.
Sorry, Jürgen.
Yes.
I cannot see your the screen. I don't know if.
Can everybody else see my slide?
No, we cannot see your screen.
No screen.
You cannot.
No screen.
yet. Now
Yeah.
you can read.
Yeah,
Now
no,
we can
it's
see.
okay.
Oh,
Perfect.
okay,
Now.
okay.
Okay.
I didn't know. Sorry, I was rambling on. Okay, So basically, everything I wanted to show you about in this institutional context is here. Let's move over to the survey. This is the data that we're working with. We do see a bit of attrition over the years. I'm going to not talk about this, but it motivates a robustness check that we do to show that our results are okay. So the main variables that we are interested in analyzing here are the ones that you see in the table summarized on the right-hand side of the slides here. And I will not be able to talk about the performance, profitability, efficiency, or turnover variables. Just putting out that they are there. Just to point out that what kind of differentiates our approach from what has typically been done in the literature is the fact that we can identify different differences in the unit price dimensions and evolution as depending on whether or not we're looking at electricity or fossil fuels. We build unit price indices for electricity or fuels. Again, this is here on the left side, but I'm again quickly going to gloss over this. Basically, what we want to see and what we want to show you here is the fact that the fossil fuel price indices that we construct do respond to the change in the subsidy scheme. And so you see that over the time of horizon of what we plot here, the dashed line seems to be moving up a bit more than the solid black line, which is the electricity unit price index. And the second thing that we see is that because of this dimension or this dynamics, that the differential between those two indices does change as well. The empirical model that we have in mind here is very simple. So basically, we look at the changes in the unit prices of fossil fuel and electricity on a set of outcome variables, which are here, as a dependent variable. And of course, reverse causality and endogeneity are a clear problem as far as this is concerned. We account for this by doing a couple of things. So first of all, there's a typical run-of-the-mill fixed effects approach where we account for firm-specific as well as industry-specific interaction terms, as well as regional time trends to take into account any kind of, say, technology-related or infrastructure-related endogeneity that might affect unit prices of electricity or fossil fuels, as well as the productivity indicators that we have in mind. We follow this up by an instrument that basically isolates the geographical markup of energy prices distribution across different particular provinces with the objection of taking out time-varying unobservables, which would otherwise typically remain with the equations that we have set up in 3 and 4. And we further relax this assumption by saying, well, what if we actually have heterogeneity in the shocks that affect our cross-sectional units? That is, can we really assume that all firms are affected by macroeconomic effects and shocks in the same way? And we account for this by employing the common correlated effects estimator by Pasteurand. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this and just again highlight what we have here. As the results, the main results are that fossil fuel increases do improve the performance indices that we have identified, indicators, excuse me, that we have listed above and before. We do not see the same effect here as far as electricity price increases go, which is something that is also in line with the findings in the literatures. And across all model specifications that we have used, our results are robust. The reason why we see those dynamics are related to capital upgrading, related to ICT infrastructure. This again lends support to findings discussed in the literature that indicate increases in productivity, profits, and capital investment related to ICT and technology, and also the production economics literature, which illustrates that smart manufacturing systems typically improve productivity, integration, quality, transparency, probably as well as flexibility and profitability as a whole. With that, I would quickly like to say that we've done a few robustness exercises here as well, which I'm going to gloss over again. But our results are robust to looking at fuel-intensive subsectors, a quasi-high power and saline to take into account attrition that we have seen. And we also look at time variation in the intervention periods that we have analyzed. Wrapping up, I would probably like to hand over to Nico again. If you want to add something, other than that, I think my part is done. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Jürgen, for the description of the methodological approach of the paper. I think that this paper showed we have experimented an empirical model in order to test to what extent higher energy fuel prices impact positively the competitiveness of firms. We find robust evidence that higher energy prices and removal of fossil fuel subsidy indirectly would have an impact to the performance of firms through a transmission channel of an increase of modern capital equipment in terms of ICT, which leads to a business upgrading and modernization of production process. In terms of the conclusion, this means that there is not necessarily a trade-off between environmental policy and industrialization. It does not mean that every environmental and energy policy has a positive impact on the economic performance. I think that it needs to be discovered more what are the synergies, the win-win impacts. Energy and environmental energy policy can be part of the industrial policy agenda. If it's true that high energy price and energy taxation can have a positive impact on the performance of industrial firms, this means that this creates some synergy between the traditional way of how we are interpreting industrial policy and energy policy. High fuel price and removal of fossil fuel subsidy may not necessarily be a threat to development in developing countries. So a removal of fossil fuel subsidies can be a trigger of business upgrading. Of course, it remains discussion to what extent this can affect firms. But for example, in this period of COVID, we are in a period where the energy prices and oil prices are low. And it's needed in terms of research, a new strand of research to elaborate on the impact of different sources of energy on competitiveness indicators. We've seen that the key of this modeling framework is that we have divided the impact of electricity prices and the impact on fuel prices, different source of energy on the competitiveness of firms. These nuances on the impact on different sources of energy, I think it needs, and the transmission channel need to be understood better in this strand of literature, and also how the firm adjusts their production responses to changes in energy prices of different types. This is important, how to accompany firms in this upgrading and modernization process. I see, for example, a question in Zoom, how much is total subsidy to fossil fuel at global scale compared to REN? If I remember correctly, but I should cross-check, it's the amount of fossil fuel subsidies higher than the renewable energy subsidies. No? So you can imagine if a reduction or removal of fossil fuel subsidies a reduction of this amount can be liberated for other purposes. Thanks a lot for your attention. Thanks, Jürgen, and thanks, colleague.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. And we are waiting now